Remarkably, hundreds of people go missing around the world every day, and while some of those cases are solved within hours, others are far more complicated. Some missing people are never seen again, despite decades of investigation, and their fate remains unknown. From a very young age, Karina Malinowski and her brother Leon were forced to look after themselves. Their mother passed away while they were still young, and they didn't see their father very often, but they managed to get by. And according to those close to her, Karina grew up to be a kind and helpful woman who loved children and always took the needs of others into account. She fell pregnant when she was 16 years old, but she never revealed who the father was and raised her daughter Annette alone. 4 years later, she met 32-year-old Stephen Malinowski after he finished his military service. The two met while he was working for a carnival that was traveling through the country, and in October of 1981 they got married. Stephen was then employed at the Mount Holly Plantation in Berkeley County, South Carolina, and they relocated there the next year. Karina got a job as a convenience store clerk in Somerville, and before long they had 2 sons together. But as time went on, their marriage started to deteriorate, and they could be heard arguing regularly. It was speculated that Stephen had developed an illegal substance habit and that he started drinking. He'd started assaulting Karina, but despite pleas from her brother, she stayed in the marriage. On the 21st of November, 1987, though, a couple had a massive fight over Stephen's drinking habit, and he would later state that she left the house at around 11 p.m. to go for a drive so that she could calm down. When she didn't arrive for her shift the next day, her boss became concerned since she had never missed a shift, and he traveled to the couple's house. He found her locked car parked at the plantation's gate, but she was nowhere to be seen. He believes that the car had been there all night since he noticed dew on the exterior, and when she could not be located, Stephen contacted the police. The plantation and surrounding areas were searched to no avail, and Stephen's polygraph test results were found to be inconclusive. The case went cold until the next year, when a bus driver reported seeing Annette, her daughter, on Highway 32 at 7 a.m. on the 4th of October, 1988. She had her dog with her and seemed to be waiting for the bus on the other side of the road. When he drove past that area again, she was no longer there, and Stephen only noticed that she was missing at 4 p.m. that day. He found a note in her handwriting stating that Teresa had returned and asking him to look after her brothers. Neither Teresa nor Annette has ever been located, and no signs of foul play or abduction have ever been found. The police received an anonymous letter in 2000 in which it was claimed that they had passed away in Sumter County, South Carolina. It contained a map to their graves, but when that area was searched, nothing was found, and both Teresa and Annette remain missing to this day, with most people believing that they started a new life together elsewhere. When 22-year-old Jeremiah Moneta went missing from Ponca City in Oklahoma, he was still unfamiliar with the area since he had just recently moved there with his mother, Jamie. He originally hailed from Kansas City, Missouri, where he lived with his uncle, but when he passed away, Jeremiah decided to relocate to Oklahoma. At first, he struggled to find his feet in the new location, but he eventually found a job that made it possible for him to rent his own place. He'd already started moving his belongings into the new apartment, which is located in Ponca, but then he inexplicably disappeared. He was also able to buy a cell phone, which makes the fact that he's been out of contact with his family all the more concerning. When he failed to show up for his shift on the 16th of January, 2025, his family became concerned, since he'd also not contacted them for some time, and they reported him as missing on the 20th. Investigators traveled to his new apartment, and when it was searched, everything was found to be in its place, and there were no signs that a struggle had taken place. But there are some concerning details in his case. When his cell phone was tracked, it was found in the possession of a woman whose name has not been made public. His asthma inhaler was found in the backyard of a house on the 400 block of North Union Street, and no one has been able to explain how it ended up there. Jeremiah always has his inhaler with him, according to his family, and the fact that it was seemingly discarded in a stranger's garden has struck them as very strange. His mother told investigators that she received a phone call from the unnamed woman, who informed her that she found his phone and inhaler. She then texted him to inform him that these items had been recovered, but when he didn't reply, his family started to worry that something untoward may have happened to him. They then contacted all the hospitals and police departments in the area in case he'd been injured or arrested, but this was not the case. Strangely, whenever they called his new phone, someone would accept the calls and then immediately hang up, which they state is not something that Jeremiah would do. They've also noted that all their text messages have been read, but they've never received a reply. When the police contacted the woman who had his phone, she suddenly changed her version of events, and she now stated she didn't find the phone, but that Jeremiah sold it to her for $20, and his family feels this is a lie. His bank account has been monitored since he was reported missing, but no transactions have taken place in the months since his disappearance. Jeremiah is described as having black hair and brown eyes, standing 5 foot 7 inches tall and weighing 130 pounds. He remains missing, and anyone with further information on his case is asked to contact the Ponca City Police Department at 580-767-0370. How could he just vanish into thin air? This is the question that remains prevalent when it comes to the case of James E. Tedford, who inexplicably disappeared one fateful day in the infamous Bennington Triangle. And within just 5 years, from 1945 to 1950, a number of other individuals had vanished, leaving no clues as to their whereabouts, and instead leaving behind cases of an inexplicable nature. Before he was called in to serve during the Second World War, James was living in Fletcher, Vermont, near Gilson Mountain, along with his wife, Pearl. After returning from the war, the veteran found his home empty. By now, he was reaching the age of retirement and ended up resigning to the Bennington Soldiers' Home, and it was here in 1949 that James would celebrate his 60s, right up until his strange disappearance. It was the 1st of December that very year that the veteran left his residence and decided to board a bus to St. Albans City to visit some relatives. It would be a long journey north, but he arrived at his destination without incident. He visited with his family, who served as a happy distraction from the sadness that had overwhelmed him since the unforeseen departure of his wife. The visit went as well as always, and James soon found himself back on the bus to make the lengthy trip back home. Boarding the bus, though, would be the last thing he ever did. Sitting among James were another 14 passengers, each of whom was in constant sight of the others. The public transport vehicle arrived in Bennington, and the passengers got off, except for one. James never arrived back in town, but he was no longer on the bus either. He didn't get off at any of the stops, according to witnesses, who claimed that he was still there when they arrived in Bennington. As they began to pile out of the bus, though, some of them realized that James was no longer there. The only clue that he was even there at all was his luggage and his open bus timetable that sat on the now empty seat. Sometime between the last stop and Bennington, James had dissipated right where he sat. Despite extensive searches, no one could figure out where he went or what happened to him. It was speculated that several other passengers failed to notice his departure, but if he'd gotten off the bus, surely he would have taken his belongings with him. The eerie nature of this disappearance attracted the attention of supernatural enthusiasts, who saw the strangeness that was present in this case. A year later, another missing person was reported, bringing the total to 5 in the same area. In the years to come, the Bennington Triangle will become a well-known source of mystery. In January of 2006, 35-year-old Teresa Butler was a mother of 2 who was living in Risco, Missouri. She was married to Dale Butler, and at the time of her disappearance, they had 2 sons, aged 2 and 4. On the night of the 24th of January, 2006, Teresa spent the evening at her sister-in-law's house, and it's known that she went home later on that night to put the 2 children to bed. It's also known that someone called her at around 10 p.m. that night, but the contents of that call remain unknown. Dale was working overnight at Maverick Tube in Blytheville, Arkansas that night, and he only arrived back home the next morning. But what he found at the house immediately sent alarm bells ringing. Teresa was nowhere to be found, and their 2 sons were located in the couple's room, one hiding under the bed covers while the other was holding an empty baby bottle. Her car, a Jeep, was still parked in its usual spot, but the radio had been removed. Some items had been removed from the house, and fearing that Teresa was abducted during a robbery that went wrong, Dale contacted the police. When the house was searched, no signs of a struggle were found, and there was no indication that someone had broken in. Strangely, one of the keys to an interior door was found broken off in its lock, and the light bulb on the front porch had been removed. Investigators reported that they found unknown DNA in the house, but it's never been revealed in what part of the house it was found, or whether it was in the form of hair, skin, or another type of biological material. It was later revealed that the missing items included a PlayStation console, a video camera, a Nintendo GameCube, a flashlight, a digital camera, and Teresa's purse, as well as her cell phone. It was also noted as strange that her leather jacket was still at the house, as she was known to wear it whenever she went out. When her phone records were checked, it was found that she made 2 calls, the first of which was made at 3:16 a.m., but she dialed the number of a man in Gideon, Missouri, whom she had no connection to, and would later tell the police that he missed the call. She then called the number of a woman in Clarkton, Missouri, and this time the woman answered. She stated that Teresa simply said hello a few times and then ended the call. She didn't notice anything strange about the call and simply assumed that someone had misdialed. This is very likely since Clarkton, Gideon, and Risco have the area code 543, and it's been suggested that she was trying to call for help but dialed the wrong numbers. This begs the question, why didn't she call 911 if she was in distress or had been abducted? Foul play was immediately suspected in Teresa's case, and the details surrounding her disappearance only got stranger from there. Dale told the police that his mother received a note from someone regarding Teresa's disappearance, but he's never revealed its contents or who it was sent by. Several theories were suggested to explain what happened to her, and the truth finally emerged. A man named Melvin Ray Hufford was arrested for ending Teresa's life, and he explained what happened that night. He told investigators that they and another man had spent some time together at her house that night, and that they had used an illegal substance. At one point, she started complaining of chest pain and then lost consciousness, and Hufford realized that she didn't have a pulse. The 2 men panicked and disposed of her body, making it look as though someone had broken into the house. He left her remains in an abandoned house for a few years, but her body was never found. Many people dispute this version of events, but whatever the case may be, Hufford was found guilty of ending her life and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. 43-year-old Joynell Brandon is a mother of 3 who's not made any contact with her family since May of 2025, and they've made several appeals to the public to report any sightings of her, as they're very concerned for her well-being. Joynell hails from Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and on the 13th of May, she was dropped off at a family friend's house at around 9 p.m. She and the friend planned on playing some cards, and he would later report that night went exactly as planned. When they were done, Joynell was picked up by a man who was unknown to her friend. He reported that the man was driving a white box truck and that Joynell had been seen getting into the vehicle on Universal Avenue at around 10 p.m. The case took a strange turn following this. While it remains unknown where Joynell and the man went after leaving her friend's house, her family stated that at 1:56 a.m., she sent them a text message asking for the door to the house to be opened as she had arrived home. But when they opened the door, she was nowhere to be seen, and she's not been in contact with anyone she knows since then. Causing further concern is the fact that she suffers from a mental health condition for which she takes medication every day, but she does not have it with her and may be struggling to cope. Strangely, the man didn't drop her off at the house, as would be normal practice, but instead dropped her off around the corner, a short distance from the house. The text message that they received after that also strikes them as strange, since Joynell is known to text incomplete sentences, and the text that was sent that morning sounded nothing like her. Her loved ones told investigators that Joynell would never decide to disappear of her own accord, since she would never abandon her children. She's also known to keep in touch with her friends and family on a regular basis, but they've not heard from her at all since that morning. They've added that the strain of not knowing where she is or what happened to her has taken a toll on the family, and they've asked for the public's assistance in her case. Investigators have not revealed whether they believe foul play is a factor in Joynell's case, or whether they have any leads as to the identity of the man that she was seen with. It's also struck a lot of people as strange that the mystery man has failed to come forward, since news of her disappearance has been spread far and wide in the area, and he would surely want to clear his name as soon as possible if he isn't responsible in her disappearance. It should be noted that the family friend with whom she spent time with that night is in no way suspected of being involved in her disappearance, and her family has reiterated that they've known him for a long time and that he's a very trustworthy person. If you've seen Joynelle or know where she may be, you're urged to contact the Pine Bluff Police Department's detective tip line at 870-730-2106. One of the most well-known disappearances ever to have been investigated by UFO researcher Bud Hopkins was the case of Linda Cortile. The reason why an alien enthusiast would be investigating such an event, of course, seems unusual. But the reason Hopkins became interested in this disappearance and reappearance was because it potentially involved extraterrestrial life. The entire ordeal was also witnessed by several people, making it the most realistic alien abduction mystery. It was the wee hours of the 30th of November, 1989, when Linda, a mother of two, was asleep on the 12th story of an apartment building. Suddenly, she awoke to a blue beam of light blasting through her window. Then, the inexplicable happened. Linda was lifted up and out of her bed and began to gravitate outside, toward what appeared to be a red-orange craft. Accompanying her on this floating journey were three gray-colored bipedal creatures, a description consistent with the theory of gray aliens. Linda was taken into the craft, which abruptly sped away toward the Brooklyn Bridge, before taking a steep dive into the East River waters. Just like that, the disc was out of sight and below the surface, with the woman inside. For the next 2 hours, Linda was missing. Eventually, she was reportedly returned to her apartment, but not before she was met with a series of strange events. When Hopkins began to investigate the case, he decided to place the woman under hypnotic regression, hoping that she could recall the events that she'd forgotten during her abduction. During the hypnosis, the abductee began to make a series of bizarre statements. She claimed to have met a diminutive figure with a large head and black eyes. After being sucked into the craft, she could see out the window and realized that they'd come to stop underwater. It would be at this point, for the next 2 hours, that she was subjected to quasi-medical procedures. The unknown creatures allegedly examined her stomach. Linda also recalled seeing one of them approach her with a long needle and realized she was being used as a lab rat. As outlandish as it may have seemed, the story was unexpectedly corroborated by at least 20 individuals who saw the incident. 2 of them were security guards who went by the pseudonyms Dan and Richard. They'd been driving near the Brooklyn Bridge with Javier Perez de Cuellar, the Secretary General of the United Nations, as their passenger. It was then that, for seemingly no reason, the car engine abruptly stopped. When they got out to investigate, they were left stunned by what they saw unfolding before them in the sky. 4 figures, one of them being Linda, were hovering in the air, defying gravity. The security guards claimed to have seen a disc-shaped object too, and watched as it darted away and crashed into the water. Several more witnesses would emerge in the months to come, each suggesting that they had seen the exact same ordeal unfold. Many theories have been put forward to explain the disappearance of Wallace Fard Muhammad, who's hailed as the founder of the Nation of Islam, but historians are still baffled by his case today, as no definitive answers have ever been found. He was born in Mecca in 1877, but by 1930, he'd relocated to the US. He settled in Detroit, and there he founded the Temple of Islam and the University of Islam, as well as the Fruit of Islam Male Guard Corps. He could be heard delivering sermons in the area and became very unpopular with some people, as he claimed that a race war was about to break out, and because he claimed that Christianity was a religion that was only for the owners of slaves. To make ends meet, he sold silk in Paradise Valley, but continued to preach about dietary restrictions that are governed by Islam and the need for African American people to become self-reliant. According to those who knew him, he was a handsome man who usually wore large robes and a fez. In 1932, he would come under fire from the authorities after one of his followers ended someone's life, and he was forced to flee from Detroit. After the police learned that he had returned on the 26th of April of that year, the university was raided, and when he was found, he was taken into custody. along with several of his followers. This led to clashes between his remaining followers and the police, and he decided that it would be better to leave Detroit and never return. He was never seen again, and since his disappearance, historians have been trying to figure out where he relocated to and what he did with the rest of his life. But to this day, all they have to go by is speculation. It's known that he was driven to the airport by one of his students, whom he had named Elijah, and that before he got on his plane, Elijah begged him to remain in Detroit, but he stated that he had no choice but to leave and that Elijah should carry on spreading the message of Islam. One theory is that he ended up serving a lengthy sentence in prison in Indiana, and that upon his release he simply faded into obscurity. Another suggestion is that he simply decided to immigrate back to the Middle East and never returned to the US. Some people think that he remained in the US and continued to run Islam without arousing any suspicion, but none of these theories are backed up by any type of proof, since no records of his whereabouts exist after he left Detroit. Elijah would go on to follow Muhammad's footsteps, leading the Nation of Islam for the next 4 decades. He passed away in 1975, after which his son, Warith Muhammad, attempted to guide the Islamic religion towards Sunnism. He remained adamant that Muhammad was still alive and that they spoke on the phone on a regular basis. Another theory, though, posits that Warthdeen's tutor, a man who was hired by Elijah, was actually Muhammad in disguise. This theory has gained a lot of traction over the years, but what truly happened to him remains unknown, and his true fate may never be revealed. It's very often the case that when someone goes missing in the wilderness, it's because they were woefully unprepared to spend an extended period of time on a trail, and it seems that that's what happened to 24-year-old James Cole. His family told investigators that James left their house in Harrington, Kansas, early on the morning of the 31st of August, 2025. He set out at around 7:15 a.m. after getting into his car, a silver 1999 Ford F-150, and headed to work, but his manager would later report that he never showed up for his shift. His movements that morning have left his family and police baffled, since his behavior was not only very out of character, but inexplicable. Rather than head to work, as he was supposed to do, he drove to Flint Hills Nature Trail. According to witnesses who saw him there, he started walking along the trail at around 8 a.m., just 45 minutes after leaving the family home, and he started traveling east. It remains unknown why he chose to go to the trail or what his plans were once he arrived there. It was noted by experienced hikers that he was ill-prepared for a hike, since he had no food or water with him and also wasn't carrying any equipment or additional clothing to keep him warm against the elements. When his absence from work was reported, James's family contacted the police, and he was reported as missing. A search was conducted that same day with the aid of trafficker dogs. They were able to find James's scent and followed it to 2800 Avenue and US Highway 56, and then to Burdick before his scent was lost. It's been suggested that he was traveling to Emporia, since he's known to have family in that area, but that theory has not been confirmed. Unfortunately, he cannot be tracked using his cell phone, since he didn't have it on him at the time. He also left his wallet behind, and hence may not have had any funds to buy food or find accommodation. His family assured investigators that James does not have any mental health issues, and he has no addictions that may cause him to act erratically. When the search dogs failed to locate him, drones were brought in to search from the air, but no further clues were found, and James's whereabouts remain unknown. Anyone with additional information on this case is asked to contact the Harrington Police Department at 785-258-2227. Or the Kansas Bureau of Investigation at 785-296-4017. Can these very questions remain prominent when it comes to yet another eerie event that occurred in the same notorious Devil's Triangle? In 1881, when the Ellen Austin, a 210-foot-long ship, departed from London, bound for New York, sending it straight through the siphoning section. At its helm was Captain Bake, who had several years' worth of experience steering schooners in the open waters, but probably not through the enigmatic area veiled by mystery. As the Ellen Austin made its way into the Bermuda Triangle, the captain spotted something unusual. It was a small ship that seemed to be drifting along aimlessly, almost alongside them. Bake and his vessel stopped at a distance from the other and attempted to make contact with it for the next 2 days. Failing this, he decided it was safe to approach. As the crew boarded the abandoned ship, they found that it was oddly in good shape, and its cargo was even intact. Missing from the ship, though, was a crew. There seemed to be no sign of any human on board, but it was loaded with untouched supplies. Captain Bake made the decision to bring the boat back to shore with them, believing it was part of an unsolved case of a missing vessel. Their journey to New York continued, with the abandoned ship now in tow, manned by another crew. Everything seemed to be going as expected until 2 days in. It was then that a sudden storm unraveled around the two vessels, causing them to separate and for the unknown ship to become lost with the paid crew on board. For the next several days, the Ella Austin searched for it and eventually discovered it aimlessly adrift again. The crew that had taken it over was mysteriously gone, just like the original passengers before. Again, the captain decided to call for another paid crew, repeating the same endeavor. The journey commenced, but the pattern continued. The ships were inexplicably separated, leaving the derelict vessel abandoned and yet another crew mysteriously missing. At this point, Bake decided to desert the mission and make his way to New York. The strange ship was never seen again after that, nor were the 3 crews that once boarded it. The fate of the crew and the origins of the ghostly vessel remain unknown. It's always a concern when someone goes missing after a vehicle collision, and hence the family of 52-year-old Joseph Gannon is very concerned for his well-being, since he vanished after such an incident. Joseph didn't collide with any other vehicles, but he crashed through a fence in Burlington, Vermont on the 14th of March 2025, and after leaving the site of the crash, he simply vanished as if into thin air. The accident occurred at around 7:45 that morning, and it was a serious crash that occurred next to a bike path on Route 127. In the process, the car ended up rolling over several times, possibly causing Joseph some injury, and it's feared that he may have suffered a concussion or other head injury that may be affecting his cognitive ability. He also wasn't alone in the car, but luckily the other occupant was not seriously injured. But when the car finally came to a rest, Joseph did something truly strange. Rather than wait for the police to arrive, he fled the scene on foot and has not been seen or heard from since. The person who was in the car with him told the police that he was supposed to meet up with Joseph a few days later, but he's not been in contact with any of his friends or family, and it remains unknown where he may have fled to. 3 days after the incident, his family decided to file a missing person report at the Burlington police station, and they told investigators that they found it very strange that he'd not been in contact with anyone. The area around the crash site was thoroughly searched with no positive results, and efforts were then focused on the Winooski River, the Ethan Allen homestead, and the Intervale area, but again, no clues were found to indicate which direction Joseph may have traveled in. At first, his daughter was certain that he would be found quickly, but as the days and weeks passed with no additional clues being found, she and the rest of Joseph's family grew more concerned, and they're worried that he may have been injured in the crash. He's in the habit of keeping in close touch with his family, but they've not heard from him since the day of his disappearance. They added that it's very out of character for him to leave the scene of an accident, and they're hoping to find some answers soon. When he fled the scene that morning, he was wearing a gray and black checkered coat, a camouflage hat, blue jeans, and work boots, but the cause of the accident has not been disclosed, and investigations are ongoing. If you or anyone you know has seen Joseph or has any information as to where he might be, you're asked to contact the Burlington Police Department at 802-658-2704. The Bermuda Triangle is often a graveyard for vessels that dare to enter its eerie borders. Some say that the Hungry section has more of a mundane nature rather than a supernatural one. Several theories have been proposed regarding this mystery, and they generally take on a mystical or magical form. Scholars and experts, though, have placed a more realistic label on it, suggesting that the Bermuda Triangle mystery is nothing more than a weather phenomenon. Rogue waves have been one theory posited by scientists. who claimed that the area was ripe for such occurrences due to the storms that move in from all angles. Rogue waves are the unusually large swells of water, once believed to be a myth. They're unpredictable and are twice the height of the waves that accompany them, making for a particularly disastrous condition for vessels heading through the triangle. It was possibly this very unfortunate phenomenon that claimed the millionaire president of Conover Mast Publications, Harvey Conover, his wife, his son and daughter-in-law, a friend, and his yawl, the Revenek. It was the 1st of January, 1958, when the Revenek set sail from Key West, bound for a 110-mile journey to Miami. They were expected to arrive at their destination in just days, where Harvey was due for an appointment with a sailmaker. Unfortunately, they would never make it to their destination. On the 2nd of January, just a day into the trip, the winds came in from the northeast. A gale was blasting in the worst winter storm in 47 years, and no one knew it was coming. By 8:30 that very morning, a warning went out into the Miami area, alerting a mild squall. 6 hours later, the wind worsened, shattering storefront windows and battering boats with 40-foot waves and gusts of wind. Several vessels were caught in the sudden invasion, and many would go missing that day. By the 8th of January, almost all of the affected vessels were accounted for, all except one. The Revenek and its passengers were ominously still missing, right there in the Bermuda Triangle. When Harvey failed to show up to his appointment 4 days later, the yacht broker, Richard Bertra, reported the disappearance to the U.S. Coast Guard. Several boats were informed and began keeping a lookout for the Revenek and its passengers. After days with still no signs of the vessel, one of the most extensive sea searches in American history was launched. Several forces merged together in the effort, consisting of the U.S. Coast Guard, the Navy, the Air Force, and even Cuban Navy. Despite several days' worth of investigation and searches, the Revenek, Harvey, and his family remained eerily missing. The disappearance of a plane called L'Oiseau Blanc is a mystery that has perplexed historians since 1927, and to this day it remains unknown what happened to the two people on board, Charles Nungesser and Francois Colli. Nungesser had served as an ace pilot in the military and became one of France's most decorated pilots at the time. He gained a reputation among his fellow soldiers as someone to look up to, since he seemingly had no fear of danger. Following his time in the military, he decided to take on a feat that had never been accomplished before. He wanted to fly from Paris to New York, which had been done many times before, but he set his sights on becoming the first pilot to do so without landing to refuel or rest. News of his endeavor spread quickly, and by the time that he was set to take off on this journey, thousands of people were following the story, hoping that he would land in New York with yet another accolade to his name. He and his navigator, Francois Colli, boarded the plane called L'Oiseau Blanc, which translates to White Bird, at 5:17 a.m. on the 8th of May, 1927, and they took off from Paris in front of a large crowd that had gathered for the historic occasion. They watched as the plane flew over the Atlantic Ocean until it eventually vanished into the distance. They would not hear from the pair again until they landed in New York, since the plane wasn't fitted with a two-way radio, but they stated that they planned to land the plane in front of the Statue of Liberty. Military planes last saw the White Bird flying over the coast of Normandy, and a British submarine would report sighting it close to the Isle of Wight. It's believed it was last spotted flying over Ireland, but these reports remain unconfirmed. Aviation enthusiasts were certain that the journey was as good as complete, and a crowd of tens of thousands of people gathered in Manhattan's Battery Park to welcome Nungesser and Colli, but they never arrived, and it was immediately assumed that tragedy had struck. Most people believed that the plane must have run out of fuel while flying over the Atlantic Ocean, and that Nungesser was unable to pilot it to safety. But if this is the case, the two men would have succumbed in the water. Pieces of metal and wood, similar to those used on the plane, were found close to Round Lake Hills, but they were never confirmed as belonging to the ill-fated plane. Many searches were conducted in hopes of solving this mystery, but no sign of Nungesser or Colli was ever found. When 65-year-old Starla Goings left her house on the 15th of August, 2025, Her family could never have imagined that they would be searching for her that evening, and that she would remain missing months later. Starla lives in Munising, Michigan, specifically on Peninsula Road, and at the time of her disappearance, she was employed as a bank teller. The last person to see her before she vanished was her husband, Stephen. He told investigators that she left their house at around midnight that night for reasons that have not been made public, and that she then got into her orange 2019 Volkswagen Tiguan and drove away. When her children realized that Starla had not been in contact with anyone she knew for several days, they contacted the police and asked that they conduct a welfare check at the house, and they obliged. The call was made at around 6:30 p.m., and investigators arrived at the house a short time later. The door was answered by Stephen, but he merely stated that he hadn't seen her since she left that night. It's unclear if he was asked why he failed to report her as missing, and if so, what his reasons were. When the police were satisfied that Starla wasn't at home, they searched the area, and her car was found parked about 3.5 miles away in a roadside lot near the corner of M94 and 16 Mile Lake Road. The car was searched, but nothing of any use was found. It was then taken in as evidence, and it'll be properly processed in hopes that some clues will be found that could lead to her last movements being discovered. Stephen told the police that he and Starla had visited the UP State Fair on the morning before her disappearance, but it remains unknown why she left the house so late at night. It's been confirmed that her vehicle was parked in the lot between 4 and 6 p.m. on the 15th of August, since a resident living in the area reported seeing it there. It also remains unknown whether it was driven there by Starla, or if she was a victim of foul play. Those living in the area have been asked to contact the police if they have any further information on the car, such as if it was being driven in the area after Starla left her home. Strangely, it remains unknown where she was heading that night, or why she would leave her car in the lot if she was the one operating it. CCTV cameras in the area have not provided any further clues, and residents are urged to provide investigators with any additional relevant footage from their security cameras. Anyone who has seen Starla since her disappearance, or who has information on how her car got to the lot where it was found, is asked to contact the Alger County Sheriff's Office at 906-387-9922. Deirdre Jacob, of course, wasn't the only one to be snatched up by the unseen forces in the area. The Vanishing Triangle is dominated by a series of inexplicable vanishings that have left experts perplexed and in search of answers. Deirdre was not the first, nor was she the last, to become an unfortunate victim of the expanding void that seems to hover over Ireland. Another victim of the strangeness that describes the Vanishing Triangle is Ava Brennan, whose abrupt disappearance occurred in 1993. Ava's case, though, was slightly different from the rest. She wasn't as young as the rest of the missing women, aged 39, but she looked as though she was in her mid-20s. It was the 25th of that year when Ava sat in her parents' Dublin home, having lunch and chatting away. But things took a sharp turn when a minor argument erupted in the household, uncharacteristic for this close family. The dispute sent the woman out the door. After that, no one really knew where she went, and for the next 2 days, the family nursed a growing concern, having heard no word from Ava. Eventually, her father decided to head over to her apartment to check in on her. Ava was living alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Madison House, located in the Dublin suburb of Rathgar. The father, David, tried to phone the apartment but received no answer, so he left and returned a short while later with a friend. Together, they broke into the room, only to find that Ava wasn't there. The apartment was clean and neat, with no signs of a struggle. There, David also found Ava's coat, the same one she'd been wearing to lunch 2 days earlier, indicating that she did arrive home that day. Missing, though, were her keys, money, handbag, and the pink tracksuit she wore the day she disappeared. That same day, the family headed to the police station to report her missing. Bizarrely, Ava's case would not receive as much police or media attention as expected, especially after the disappearance that came just months earlier, which saw the vanishing of Annie McCarrick, who also took place within the Vanishing Triangle. Much like the case of Deirdre, Ava seemed to have vanished in place. She departed her parents' home and stepped into oblivion. Many people believe that the nickname of James Tate, who was known as Honest Dick, is the exact antithesis of his true nature, and that he managed to pull off a heist that in 1888 cost the US government a lot of money. Tate originally hailed from Franklin County in Kentucky, where he worked as a clerk in a post office for a while. He was twice given the title of Assistant Secretary of State, first in 1854 and again in 1859, but he resigned both times to pursue his own ambitions as a businessman. In 1867, he became the state treasurer, and his work was so commendable that he was re-elected every 2 years for the next 2 decades. He was seen as an extremely honorable and trustworthy man who took his role very seriously and who was extremely accurate when it came to bookkeeping. But in 1886, most people's opinion of Tate changed dramatically. By that point, no one had ever thought to double-check his work, but that year, he was informed that the government would be taking a closer look at his books. He immediately stated that he needed more time to ensure everything was as it should be, and before any of this could be done, he got on a train to Louisville, and one of his clerks would report that he'd seen Tate filling 2 tobacco bags with silver and gold coins that he estimated were worth around $100,000. He also provided investigators with a note from Tate in which he stated that he would return in 2 days. No one suspected that anything untoward was going on, since Tate had such a good reputation. But when he still hadn't returned a week later, an investigation was launched. It was discovered that after reaching Louisville, he boarded another train and traveled to Cincinnati, Ohio, and then simply vanished as if into thin air. No one suspected that he would abscond, since his daughter and wife were left behind, and his records were then scrutinized. The state ledger was found in a state of disarray, and by some accounts was almost indecipherable. It was also discovered that he'd made loans to several state officials, and that most of those had never been repaid. But even more shocking was the discovery that Tate had used a lot of state funds to make personal investments in real estate and the mining sector. He was now ousted as an embezzler, thief, and terrible bookkeeper who had not only fled with a lot of government money, but had stolen about $247,000 during the years that he served as state treasurer. Tate was charged for his crimes and unsurprisingly impeached, but no one knew where he was or how to find him. Honest Dick was never convicted of his crimes, since he managed to evade the law for the rest of his life, no doubt living the good life off the money that he had stolen. Stephen Wayne LeCount, a 53-year-old man who hails from Lansing in North Carolina, went missing on the 10th of August 2025, and his whereabouts remain unknown. A $5,500 reward is being offered for information that leads to his case being solved, and investigators remain dedicated to finding him. At the time, Stephen was living on the 200 block of Howell Road, and it was there that he was last seen. Witnesses have stated that he simply wandered away from the property and that he failed to return, prompting them to contact the police so that a search could be conducted. What's causing those close to him a lot of concern is the fact that Stephen suffered a head injury that may be affecting his judgment and his ability to find his way home. And he may also be unable to ask for assistance since the injury has caused him to have impaired speech, and it's been revealed that he has diminished cognitive ability, and mentally, he still acts like a child. His family has also informed the police that he may only respond to the name Steve rather than Stephen, and that he may have attempted to reach the Sunset Beach area since he's known to have family there. The investigation into his case started on the 11th of August when the North Carolina Center for Missing Persons informed the public of Stephen's disappearance, and they issued an appeal for everyone living in the area to keep a lookout for him and to contact them as soon as he's spotted. In the days that followed, the Silas Creek Road, North Fork New River, and Lansing areas were searched. Search dogs, trained search personnel, and boat teams were called in to aid in the search, but they were unable to find any signs of Stephen or any clues as to where he might have gone. These efforts were eventually called off on the 16th of August after nearly 600 hours of searching, and investigators will now have to rely on information from the public to make any further progress in the case. People living in the Sunset Beach area have been asked to check their surveillance footage for any sign of Stephen, but no leads have been received at this point. Because of his diminished mental capacity, there are great fears for Stephen's safety, and he needs to be located as soon as possible. If you have any information that can help investigators track him down, you're urged to contact the Ashe County Sheriff's Office at 336-846-5600. Stephen's NamUs case number is MP149136. Most people who have an interest in unsolved mysteries are aware of the strange case of a ship called the Mary Celeste that was found abandoned about 400 nautical miles from the Azores in Portugal on the 5th of December, 1872. But not everyone knows the tale behind its captain, a man named Benjamin Spooner Briggs. Briggs was a master mariner who was respected by his crew for being fair and for his excellent ability as a seaman. Before he became the captain of the Mary Celeste, he commanded several other ships and quickly gained a reputation as a trustworthy and well-versed skipper. He was married to Sarah Cobb, the daughter of a reverend, and was known to be a religious man himself who did his best to remain humble under any circumstance. They lived in Marion, Massachusetts, specifically in Rose Cottage. On several occasions when Briggs set sail, Sarah would accompany him, and by all accounts, he was extremely devoted to his family, but also to the crew that served under him. Sarah and their daughter Sophia would join him on that last journey aboard the Mary Celeste, which set sail from New York on the 7th of November, 1872. The ship was filled with industrial-strength alcohol and was scheduled to sail to Genoa in Italy, but no one could have foreseen the tragedy that was about to befall the ship and everyone on board. The crew of a ship called the Del Grazia would later report that they saw the Mary Celeste sailing in the mid-Atlantic Ocean on the 5th of December, but they immediately noticed that something was wrong as they could see no crew on deck and it seemed to be drifting aimlessly. The captain of the Del Grazia ordered a few of his men to row out to the Mary Celeste and report back what they had found. When they returned, they stated that the ship seemed to be in good shape, but they noted that a few of the barrels of alcohol were missing. They found an abundance of water and food aboard, and the crew would have had no problem surviving for several more months. The crew's quarters and gear were all found as expected, with nothing out of place, but there was no one aboard, and they could find no explanation. The Mary Celeste was then tethered to the Del Grazia and towed to Gibraltar, where it was hoped that they could hand the ship over and receive a salvage payment. But the Attorney General in charge of the inquiry into the disappearance of the crew and passengers immediately knew something was off, and he launched an investigation. He learned that everyone on board left their personal possessions behind. They seemingly didn't take any food or water that was available to them, and it didn't make much sense if they were forced to abandon ship. Furthermore, there seemed to be no reason for the crew to do this, since the Mary Celeste was in good shape and would have had no issues sailing to its intended destination. He suggested that the crew of the Del Grazia had happened upon Briggs and his crew, and then ended the lives of everyone on board to make some quick money. But there were no signs on either ship that any violence had taken place, and the Del Grazia was paid $46,000 for the salvage, only a fraction of what should have been paid. The Flannan Isle case isn't the only lighthouse keeper mystery on the block. The Great Isaac Lighthouse disappearances have also found their spot on the Great List of Mysteries. This time, though, it involves the Bermuda Triangle and some of the theories associated with it. The concept of aliens being behind the whole mystery is nothing new. UFO enthusiasts have long argued that this area is really a stargate, allowing extraterrestrials to enter our world, causing major disturbances, phenomena, and inexplicable disappearances. It was the Bermuda Triangle's unknown forces that seemed to be connected to the Great Isaac Lighthouse mystery. Sitting smack in the middle of the infamous zone is a coral island complete with a lighthouse. It was established on the island in 1859, where it soon became a destination for the unexplained, peculiar hauntings, and alleged ghosts. Despite the eeriness that lingers here, there was still the necessity for lighthouse keepers who were forced to endure the strange happenings that plagued the island. In 1969, 2 unfortunate souls became those very keepers, the only inhabitants stuck on a small island, manning a light to warn incoming vessels, roaming the small room of the tall tower, surrounded by the strange. On the 4th of October that year, regularities called for a small boat to head off to the island to check on the keepers. Oddly, the control centers hadn't heard from the 2 for some time, and they failed to call in routinely as expected. When the small boat, boarded by investigators, arrived at the island, they found that it was barren, empty of all forms of life aside from foliage and the odd seagull here or there. Upon further investigation, they would find absolutely no sign of the Guardians. The first assumption was that the hurricane that had struck days earlier may have been responsible for the abrupt disappearance, but the lack of damage to the lighthouse and the surrounding settlements told a different story. The next best guesses were a narcotics smuggling ring, kidnapping, and other nefarious occurrences, but there was no evidence to suggest any form of foul play. With nothing to suggest anything untoward, the fate of the keepers was left to be a mystery. With no answers, the community was left to theorize and paint an eerie picture about the occurrences that go on within the Bermuda Triangle. 35-year-old Hoi Kei-woo, who's better known to her family and friends as Patricia, has been missing since the 18th of April 2025, and those who are close to her are growing ever more concerned for her well-being, as they've been unable to find any clues as to what happened to her. Patricia originally hails from Hong Kong, but she relocated to Tucson, Arizona via a student visa. She was a student at the University of Arizona, from where she attained a Master of Science degree in Business Analytics, and she graduated in December of 2024. She had a bright future ahead of her since she met her husband while they were both attending university, and they traveled to China to get married. After she finished her studies, she stayed on at the university as she was offered a job as a lab research assistant. Her husband describes her as a friendly and outgoing person, which instantly attracted him to her, and before long they'd become good friends. After a few months, the relationship developed into a romantic relationship, and he decided to ask her to marry him. All of these factors make Patricia's disappearance all the stranger, since she was looking forward to her future, and according to those close to her, she wouldn't simply leave of her own accord without informing her loved ones. But on the 18th of April, 2025, she was at home with her husband in Tucson when she told him she was stepping out to get some fresh air. He would later tell investigators that this was in no way unusual, but when she failed to return to the house, he became concerned. When she was still nowhere to be found the next morning, he contacted the police, and a missing person file was opened. Searches in the immediate area were carried out to no avail, and 2 days later, Patricia's Volkswagen Tiguan was discovered in Catalina Highway near Windy Point at Mount Lemmon. There was no sign of her, but when the vehicle was searched, her purse and phone were found to still be inside. It was assumed that Patricia was somewhere in the area and that she may have gotten lost, but despite a search effort that lasted for 6 days, no further clues were found. While the possibility has not been ruled out, investigators stated that they found no evidence to indicate that anything untoward had happened to her, but the investigation is ongoing, and Patricia's devices, including her laptop and cell phone, are being analyzed in case they contain information as to where she planned on going that day. Her friends and family have been left baffled by the fact that her car was found at Windy Point, since she'd never spoken about visiting that area, and had she decided to travel there, she would have told her husband where she was heading, but that was not the case. Her friends have asked that anyone in the community who has security cameras check them for footage of Patricia, since it may help establish her last movements before she vanished, but no such footage has been found at this point. All search efforts have now been called off, and hence it's crucial that anyone with information come forward by contacting the Pima County Sheriff's Office at 520-351-4900. It's very uncommon, but also disconcerting when a missing person's vehicle is found, but they cannot be located. That's exactly what happened in the case of the disappearance of 22-year-old Eric Wajdela, who's not been seen by his family since July of 2025. Since this case is only a few months old, not much information is available, but it's known that Eric was living in the 1400 block of Denton Court in Plainfield, Illinois when he went missing, and that he was last seen there on the 26th of July. It's believed that the last person he spoke to was his father. Investigators have revealed that they spoke on the phone on the 27th of July, the day after he was last seen, but he's not been in contact with any of his friends or family since then, and since he didn't tell anyone of his plans, it's unknown where he may have traveled to. He disappeared along with his car, a 2008 Honda hatchback, and strangely, his vehicle was caught by flock cameras, which are AI-powered license plate readers used by the police, as it was being driven down Route 31 in West Dundee on the 18th of July. It's believed that he was the one operating the vehicle at that time. After he was reported as missing, witnesses came forward to report that they'd seen Eric at Seba Park in South Elgin that same day, and when the area was searched 3 days later, his vehicle was found in the park's parking lot, but he could not be located. What struck investigators and his family as strange is the fact that Eric has never made any inquiries as to what happened to his vehicle, which has led many people to speculate that he never returned to the parking lot, and it remains unknown whether he intended to or not. It also remains unknown whether he's visited the park before or whether he has any friends who live in that area. He's not been in contact with anyone since the day that he was last seen at his house, and hence his family has been left in a state of limbo while they seek answers in his case. They've asked that anyone who'd like to volunteer as a searcher contact them via email at findericnow@gmail.com. If you or anyone you know can add anything useful to Eric's case, you're asked to get in touch with Detective McDonald from the Will County Sheriff's Office by dialing 815-727-8575 and ask for extension 4934. The missing person investigation involving 23-year-old Kata Scott, an aspiring Miss USA model, is one that has caused investigators in Philadelphia some concern, since evidence has been found that she's not vanished of her own accord, and it's been suggested that she was a victim of foul play. In October of 2025, Kata was working at an assisted living facility called Chestnut Hill, which is located in northwest Philadelphia. It's known that she intended to work her shift there on the 4th of October, but her movements following that remain a mystery. Her mother has added that she last saw her that day at the 8300 block of Rodney Street in East Mount Airy when she left to go to work, and she's been unable to make contact with her ever since. Staff at the facility say that Kata strangely didn't complete her shift that day, and it remains unknown why she decided to leave early, or whether she informed anyone that she would not be working her full shift. Some sources state that she was supposed to work overnight from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and that she arrived early, but left at around 9:45, 15 minutes before her shift was supposed to start. But it is known that she was still dressed in her black scrubs when she left the building, which is not normal practice. When her family had not seen her or heard from her by the 5th of October, they contacted the police to open a missing person case. The case only gets stranger from there, as her vehicle was found still parked at the facility, which unfortunately doesn't have any CCTV cameras. Due to her conscientious nature, it's very out of character for Kata to simply disappear without a trace. As part of the investigation, her cell phone and social media activity have been closely monitored, but neither has shown any activity since the day she vanished. Her family told the police that days prior to her disappearance, Kata had complained that an unknown person had been calling on her phone and harassing her, but it isn't known what this person told her, and they remain unidentified. Many people believe that when that person is found, it may lead to Kata's whereabouts. One tip, which was received on the 10th of October, led the police to search the area surrounding the Aubrey Arboretum, which is situated about 3 miles from Kata's workplace, but no clues were found. The search was conducted with the aid of search dogs and police officers, but to no avail. The fact that she's not been active on her social media is causing a lot of concern, since Kata was known to use these platforms every day. Investigators have not stated outright that foul play is suspected in her case, but noted the fact that her car was left behind at her workplace as indicative that she may have disappeared against her will, and they're committed to uncovering what happened to her. Anyone who has seen Kata or has information that could lead to her whereabouts is asked to contact the Philadelphia Police Department's Northwest Detectives at 215-686-3353. Nyesha Pickens is a 17-year-old woman who disappeared from Cordell in Georgia on the 6th of July, 2025, and she's not been seen since. Her family has vowed to never stop looking for her until she's located, but few leads have been found in her case, despite a $5,000 reward being offered for information. It's known that Nyesha was at 402 South 7th Street in Cordell at around 2 a.m. on the 6th of July, since a few witnesses have come forward to report that they spotted her at an in-market store in the area before she vanished. But she's not been in contact with anyone she knows since then. When she failed to return home, her mother reported her as missing on the 7th of July, and an investigation was started. Surveillance footage was retrieved from a gas station in the area, and in the footage, Nyesha could be seen getting into a car that was unfamiliar to her friends and family at around 2 a.m. She got into the passenger side of the car, and the driver has yet to be identified. It's believed that they have vital information in the case, since they know where Nyesha went after leaving the gas station. Strangely, as soon as the car was driven away from the station, Nyesha's phone either ran out of battery or was turned off, and it's not been used in the months since she vanished. Her friends have mentioned that the driver of the car may have been a man named Kwan, but this has not been confirmed. Her mother has been shown the footage from the gas station, and she told a news outlet that she knows the man who was driving the vehicle, but the police have declined to comment on this as it is still an ongoing investigation. Her mother has also stated that she's not been kept in the loop as to all the details that have been uncovered in Nyesha's case, but she added that she understands that some of the details may be case sensitive and hence have not been made public. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation has since joined the investigation and is working alongside the Cordell Police Department and the Crisp County Sheriff's Office in hopes that additional clues will be found, but only time will tell whether they can make any progress in the case. The public has been asked to report any sightings of Nyesha as soon as they occur, since any seemingly insignificant detail may lead to her being found, and it's still hoped that the $5,000 reward will act as an incentive for someone with knowledge of the case to come forward with that new information. In an update that was shared by the police on the 12th of July, investigators stated that they have reason to believe that Nyesha may have changed her hair color since she vanished, but they've declined to share what led them to this conclusion. If you have any information to share with investigators, you're asked to contact the Cordell Police Department at 229-276-2921. Adopting its name from the infamous Bermuda Triangle, the Bennington Triangle also serves as a siphoning force of mystery, sucking people in and never spitting them out. This enigmatic section is centered around Glastonbury Mountain, encompassing a 100 square mile section of southwestern Vermont. Within the triangle are Bennington, Glastonbury, and Woodford, each of which has their fair share of unsolved vanishings. Because these strange disappearances are inexplicable, residents are often left to their imagination, leading to the creation of wild theories that they believe may explain the nature of their occurrences. The Bennington Triangle falls within an area of thick forest and natural wonders. Here, theories and legends arose, speaking of the mythical and the mystical. One story attributes these bizarre disappearances to a particularly malicious stone. Allegedly, anyone who stands atop said stone will be swallowed whole. Tales of curses speak of the place where the four winds meet, a place of countless burials that's unleashed misfortune on the land. And if devilish stones and curses weren't enough, theories abound about wild men characterized by their inhuman height and hairy bodies. Some believe that these strange beasts may roam the dense woods and are responsible for the inexplicable disappearances, and they may not be wrong. In 1897, Glastonbury would face a major issue, one that would lead to the town's disincorporation. As a bustling lumber settlement, this area saw a significant removal of trees that would be used to make furniture, houses, and other products. In place of the trees, pathways, new horses, and buildings grew, but this also posed a great threat. That year, a flood ravaged the town, and with no trees or root systems to alleviate the flooding, the town was left decimated and abandoned. There it sat, a ghost town, quiet and unwelcoming for several years as the wilderness reclaimed it. It wouldn't be until 1945 that the site was back in the public eye. The reason for this was a bizarre disappearance that had been dominating the newspaper headlines since the 12th of November that year. The name Middle Rivers was one that everyone knew. He was an outdoorsman who'd become acquainted with these woods in the 75 years of his existence, the very woods that would take him. An avid hunter and fisherman, Rivers would join up with a few friends and his son-in-law for a hunting party. It was a small group that would be heading into the forgotten Glastonbury town, hoping to spot a deer or two. Upon reaching Bickford Hollow, though, Rivers, an expert in his venture and the leader of the party, opted to move ahead of everyone else. They were heading back to camp on the southwest side of Glastonbury Mountain. It didn't take long before the rest of the group lost sight of Rivers, who allegedly greatly outpaced them. Believing they would see him back at the camp, the men just continued. But when they arrived there, they found no sign of the man anywhere. Concern washed over them, hoping that his absence was nothing more than a wrong turn. So they waited. A few hours turned to days, and still there was no sign of him. Rivers never showed up. The hunters headed for Bennington, where they met with Fire Chief Wallace Madison, and in a matter of days a search party of more than 100 people came together. But Middle Rivers was never seen again after he became separated from his hunting party. The UFO and extraterrestrial connection are concepts that have long dominated the conspiracy theory world. The idea of outer space visitors is so popular that it's gained a cult following that's even seen the establishment of ufology, the study of unidentified flying objects, with many self-proclaimed experts believing that these objects are of alien origin. The scope of UFOs and aliens extends intriguingly far, with each collapsible pocket offering a whole new theory, each connecting to the main concept. Within these pockets, there are stories of advanced civilizations, the world is a zoo hypothesis, government cover-ups, reptilian space beings that want to take over the world, peaceful visitors, and scientists from the future who are experimenting on humanity. The concept of abductions and probes is nothing new. Throughout the years, several abductees have come forward to tell their stories, recalling each detail vividly like a fever dream, suggesting a world far beyond what we can comprehend. Although it may sound outlandish, several missing people mysteries have been connected to alien abductions and UFO activity, even though there's no proof to the narrative. Disappearances, though, aren't always permanent, and sometimes the only evidence comes from the mouths of those who were formerly missing, such as the case with Filiberto Cardenas, whose departure and emergence raised questions about what we truly know about the world we call home. It was the 3rd of January, 1979 in Florida, when the Cuban-born businessman and gas station owner received an unexpected phone call. Filiberto was standing in his gift shop at the time when his friend Fernando Martí rang him up. He asked if he'd like to accompany him out to the city to purchase a pig from some merchants on the outskirts of town. Fernando didn't have an operational vehicle, so he would need to use Filiberto's station wagon. The businessman agreed, and in a matter of minutes, his friend was outside of his shop, along with his wife and daughter. Fernando hopped into his station wagon's driver's seat since Filiberto was too tired to drive, and off they went in search of a pig to buy, but found themselves out of luck. They'd already been to 2 farms, but no pigs were available. Eventually, they turned off down a side road, allegedly following an arrow that marked the way. Another turn sent them down the road in terrible conditions, but it wasn't the dirt, holes, and rocks that would be the most memorable feature of this trip. At some point, the station wagon began losing power, and eventually the engine stopped. When Fernando tried to start the engine again, there was no response at all. The 2 men climbed out of the vehicle and headed to the front, hoping to figure out what the issue was. Several attempts were made to start the car and determine the fault, but to no avail. Eventually, the lights and all other electronics stopped working too. Believing that the issue was now electrical, Filiberto and Fernando lay their bodies across the engine to look behind at the wires and connections. Then, suddenly, a reflection of red and violet light sent the 2 men looking around. The colors were followed by the sound of a swarm of bees. Both of these features increased dramatically in sequence until the entire car was shaking. Fernando's family was beginning to panic, believing they were experiencing an earthquake, but it was far more terrifying than that. Filiberto soon began to feel paralyzed, almost as though an unseen force was restraining him. He then began to lift into the air as he screamed in terror. The rest of the witnesses soon found what exactly that humming sound was coming from. A bulky-looking object hovered in the sky. As soon as it was noticed, though, it disappeared, along with that intensifying noise and luminance. Everything was eerily quiet. Even Filiberto's screams had ceased. But there was a more terrifying reason for this. He was gone. Fernando and his family called out for him, but got no response. Mysteriously, the station wagon's engine roared to a start, and the family made their way to the nearest gas station, where they found a phone and called the missing man's wife. The first words that came out of Fernando's mouth were, "A light took Filiberto away." Fernando headed back down the road and found a police car. He explained in haste the ordeal that had just unfolded, and an investigation soon followed. Helicopters whirred overhead in the area where the incident reportedly took place, but they couldn't spot the missing man anywhere. For 2 hours, they searched until finally there was a revelation. 16 kilometers away from where he was last seen, Filiberto was found. He was left in the middle of the Tamiami Trail, a completely different highway with no recollection of how he'd gotten there. Filiberto reconnected with his friends and family at the police station, while the search for him was now being called off. He would later go on to describe his experience after the supposed abduction. It included a strange helmet, 3 non-human figures, and a slew of tests that left 108 marks on his body. The ordeal was certainly strange, and though he was found, much mystery remains in the wake of Filiberto's creepy 2-hour disappearance. It was in 1964 when the first mention of the Bermuda Triangle was made. It was when a writer began to catalog the several catastrophes that had been taking place in the infamous area since the 1800s. Ever since then, the concept has taken up permanent residence in our imagination and has become a term synonymous with inexplicable disappearances. It's the idea of there being a strange section marked by 3 places that's been attributed to several vanishings. Over the years, several theories have emerged in an effort to explain this mysterious force that absorbs anything and everything that ventures into it. Some say it's rogue waves and magnetic forces, as others chant the concepts of methane bubbles and wormholes, transporting things and people to forgotten times and undiscovered realms. Bruce Gernon is one man who survived this very theory and published a book documenting the possibility of a wormhole that allowed his craft to leap ahead 100 miles, skipping through time and space. Perhaps it was this very theory that was behind the bizarre disappearance of Fairchild C-119. Only this plane wasn't so lucky and suffered an unknown fate. It was the 5th of June, 1965, when the flying boxcar, operated by the United States Air Force, took to the skies from Homestead, Florida, with its destination set for Grand Turk Island, meaning it was bound to fly straight through the Bermuda Triangle. The Fairchild, built to hold cargo, was carrying an airplane engine that was supposed to be delivered to the island. After departing from its airport, the craft made a quick stop in Miami, adding another 4 passengers on board. There were mechanics that would be fixing the engine of a different C-119 that was stranded on the island. Following the departure of Miami, at 9:47 that evening, the craft headed into the unknown and never came out again. With 10 people inside, the Fairchild enigmatically disappeared, never arriving at its intended destination. After receiving no communication from the craft for several hours, a massive search was launched, and during this endeavor, not a single trace of the missing plane or its occupants could be found. No debris and no bodies. Eventually, the search was retired, and the disappearance just became another eerie example in the ever-growing list of Bermuda Triangle disappearances. Ireland is no stranger to the bizarre and inexplicable. In fact, it's here that one of the biggest conspiracy mysteries endures: the Vanishing Triangle, a term coined by the Irish media back in the 90s to refer to an area in which a slew of disappearances and homicides occurred, most of which remain unsolved today. Between 1993 and 1998, 8 women disappeared without a trace in this strange section that sees no boundaries. But by 2011, that number quickly went up to 17 unsolved cases of both disappearances and homicides. Many of them occurred within the Wicklow Mountains of Leinster, where trees and small mountains dominate the expanse of the national park. Quite bizarrely, 8 of the initial missing women each have several things in common. They all disappeared suddenly, without a trace. They were acting normally when they were last seen. They were young and attractive, and none of their bodies were ever found. One theory that dominates the mystery of the Vanishing Triangle is the idea that an unnamed serial slayer lurks in the shadows of the national park, only coming out to grab his next victim and pull them into the darkness with him. Others believe that something sinister may be behind these eerie disappearances, such as human trafficking or supernatural occurrences. Several of these theories have been explored when it comes to the case of Deirdre Jacob, an 18-year-old who left only questions when she mysteriously vanished. Just months after having completed high school in 1997, she decided to move to London, where she studied teaching. The following year, having completed her first year at Strawberry Hills College, she decided to return to Ireland to visit her parents at their home in Rosebery, Newbridge, County Kildare. It was a Thursday, the 28th of July, 1998, when the story of Deirdre would unfold. She had just finished her chores and written out some letters when she decided to head out for a walk. It was 10 a.m. when she left her parents' home, bound for the town of Newbridge, which was 25 minutes away. Along the way, the young woman planned to stop off at her grandmother's home. Following their visit, Deirdre was spotted on a surveillance camera after 2 p.m. at the Newbridge post office, sending a bank draft to the UK. After this, it seemed that she decided to walk home. On her way back, she spoke to some old school friends and visited her grandmother again. By the time she was within view of her parents' house, it was 3:30 in the afternoon. A neighbor reportedly spotted the young woman, and they exchanged greetings. At this point, she was no more than 300 yards away from the driveway. The last sighting of Deirdre placed her on the grass verge, right before the gate at the end of the driveway to the house, and then she vanished. It was as though she disappeared right on the spot, just moments away from safety. It would be hours before anyone realized that she was missing, but when they did, a thorough search commenced. But police could find no trace of Deirdre anywhere. She left behind no strand of hair, no item of clothing, and no clue that would lead them to her whereabouts. She simply dissipated into thin air, never to be seen again, consumed by the mystery of the Vanishing Triangle. It's remarkable how often someone goes missing while hiking, and while they're a part of a large group of hikers that, as one would expect, would have seen what happened to them. But in many of these cases, the missing person decided to split from the group and they were never seen again. A good example of this is the case involving the disappearance of Jim Carter, a 32-year-old man from Seattle, Washington, who's been missing since May of 1950. Jim was an experienced outdoorsman and hiker who traveled to Mount St. Helens to join a group of 20 hikers for a hike. The entire group traveled up the mountain together and managed to reach the top, where they took in the scenery before starting the trek back down. But as they reached an area called Dog's Head, which is situated about 8,000 feet from the base of the mountain, Jim decided to deviate from their plans. He wanted to take a photo of the group while they were making their way down, and to do so, he had to ski to the left of the trail. This didn't cause the rest of the group any concern, since he was also an experienced skier. But what happened next left the rest of the group baffled, and it's since resulted in several conspiracy theories as to what happened to Jim. It's believed that he took the photo, but instead of rejoining the group, he started skiing down the mountain at breakneck speed. They would later tell investigators that no one would have sped down the mountain as he did unless something was terribly wrong. Not only was he going too fast, but he jumped over several crevices, and he seemed to be fleeing from something, since he seemed terrified. In a matter of seconds, he disappeared from the group's view, and he was never seen again. It's now been 75 years since that fateful day, and investigators are no closer to finding out what happened. Adding further mystery to this case, some searchers stated that while they were scouring the mountain for the next 5 days, they felt as though they were being watched. One searcher stated that the hair on the back of his neck would stand up on occasion, and the entire area had an eerie atmosphere to it. Some people believe that Jim was fleeing from a Sasquatch at high speed, but no strange tracks were found in the snow, and no further signs of the missing man were ever found. 49-year-old Jerry McCohen is yet another experienced outdoorsman who somehow disappeared while out in the wilderness, and who's not been found years after he went missing. Jerry was a well-known hunter in his hometown of Malin, Oregon, and his disappearance took those who knew him by complete surprise. At the time, he was living on the family's farm where he grew potatoes, grain, and alfalfa. Also living on the farm were his parents, Bertha and Clifford, who never received any answers as to what happened to him, despite several searches being conducted. They described him as a very independent single man who didn't always let them know what his plans were, but they knew he was experienced in the wilderness, as he often went hunting with his bow and arrows. He preferred using this equipment rather than firearms. The last time that his parents saw him was on the 21st of September 2002, when he set out from the farm, which was located in the area of the 24,200 block of Old Main Highway. He told them that he was heading to Doorknob Snowmobile Park, where he intended to do some hunting. The park was located in Siskiyou County, California, and he set out to the notorious Mount Shasta with his bow and arrows at the ready. His parents saw him set off in his brown and white 1986 GMC pickup truck, and they expected him to be back later that evening, but Jerry never came home. Later that night, they became concerned that something may have happened to him, and they contacted the police. Initial searches of the area didn't provide investigators with any leads, but 2 weeks after he had gone missing, Jerry's truck was found. On the 8th of October, it was discovered in a dense wooded area close to Medicine Lake Road. This area is located close to the snowmobile park. It was found by a group of hunters who saw a flyer detailing Jerry's disappearance. The flyer was stuck to the wall of a packing shed in the valley, and they immediately informed the police. When investigators and his family searched the truck, they found that the heater had been turned all the way up and that the radio was turned off, which was not unusual, according to his parents. Since they now finally had their first clue, more than 100 volunteers and professional searchers started scouring the area, but to their frustration, not a single clue was found. Search dogs looked for his scent to no avail, and the helicopter provided by the California Highway Patrol failed to spot any sign of him from the air. A 10-square-mile area was thoroughly searched, but with no positive result. Bertha and Clifford are certain that Jerry was a victim of foul play, since they feel he would never have simply gotten lost in an area that he knew like the back of his hand. They also stated their belief that his truck was driven to the area where it was found by someone else, and a $20,000 reward for information was offered, but it was never collected. None of Jerry's clothing, equipment, or weapons were ever located, and his fate remains undetermined to this day. Investigators say the case of the disappearance of 21-year-old Mary Virginia Carpenter is the oldest cold case in the state of Texas, and more than 75 years later, no one has been able to figure out where she is or what became of her. Mary hailed from Texarkana, and she had aspirations of becoming a nurse or a lab technician, and in pursuit of this dream, she relocated to Texas, arriving in Dalton on the 1st of June 1948, and she planned on enrolling at Texas State College for Women, where she planned to take a summer class. It's known that she traveled there on Texas Special Number 31 passenger train, and she met a woman called Marjorie Webster during the trip. Marjorie was a teacher who was also planning on enrolling at the college, and they got to know each other during the 6-hour journey to Texas. Once they arrived, they decided to share a cab to the college's dorm rooms, as was confirmed by the cab driver, Edgar Ray Zachary. He dropped them off at Brackenridge Hall, but Mary immediately returned to the train station with Edgar, as she'd forgotten to check whether her luggage had arrived safely. Marjorie wanted to go back with her, but Mary stated that she'd be fine, and that her new friend should start getting settled in. At the train station, she learned that her luggage was still on the way, and Edgar told her that he could pick it up and deliver it to the college the next day. She readily accepted the offer and then drove back to the college. She was dropped off at around 9:30 p.m., and Edgar would later state that he saw 2 men waiting for them next to a cream-colored car. She stated that she knew the men and asked them why they were there. They simply stated that they would carry her luggage that she had with her, and once she got out of the cab, Edgar went on his way. The next day, he made good on his promise and picked up the luggage, but he had to leave her suitcase on the lawn outside the dorm building since he couldn't find Mary. 2 days later, the suitcase was still sitting in the same spot, and she was never seen again. Her boyfriend contacted the police when he hadn't heard from Mary for several days, and it came to light that she enrolled for her course and never arrived back at the dorm. Staff at the college hadn't seen her at all, and her mother tried to open a missing person case, but she was told to go to bed and call back in the morning. A case was filed the next day, and the resulting search effort stretched all of Texas. It was conducted with the use of search dogs, boats, and planes, and large groups of searchers, but no sign of Mary could be found. Edgar, the cab driver, was cleared of suspicion early on since he had a solid alibi. But years later, his wife would reveal that while she told the police that he had arrived at home at 10 p.m., she had lied at his request since he was out until at least 2 a.m. But there was no proof that he had harmed her, and he was never arrested. No sightings of Mary led to her whereabouts, and her baffling case remains unsolved. In December of 1988, Jamie Williams, the 12-year-old daughter of 32-year-old Rebecca Pauline Gary, was spending Christmas with her extended family, and Rebecca was supposed to get her on the 27th of that month, but she never did, and they've not seen her or heard from her since. Jamie and Rebecca had just moved to Baton Rouge in Louisiana, and they were still getting settled into their new surroundings. Jamie hadn't had a chance to make any new friends, and so her mother thought it would be better if she spent Christmas in familiar surroundings with her grandmother, who was living in Shreveport. Rebecca chose to stay behind in Baton Rouge, and years later, Jamie would state that she found the decision to be a strange one, since her mother decided on the spur of the moment to send her to Shreveport. She begged Rebecca to go with her, but she refused. Instead, she drove her to a bus station where she bought a one-way ticket on the 18th of December, and Jamie had no choice but to travel to her grandmother's home. But while on the way to the bus station, they got into a heated argument, since Jamie still didn't want to leave. The argument continued until she got onto the bus, and Jamie remembers the last words she said to her mother being, "I hope you die," a statement that she now deeply regrets. She arrived in Shreveport 4 hours later, and today she suspects that Rebecca was trying to get her out of Baton Rouge for a specific reason, as if she knew something bad was about to happen. The family didn't receive a call from Rebecca on Christmas Day, which struck them as very strange. But on the 27th, she called her sister Joyce to say that things were not going as planned in the new city, and that she needed someone to get her. She didn't elaborate, and hence it isn't known what went awry. Joyce spoke to Rebecca's best friend, telling him that Rebecca needed help, and she assumed that he would travel to Baton Rouge to get her, but this was not the case. When the police were contacted, they told the family that Rebecca probably wasn't missing and that she was likely off somewhere having a good time. No missing person case was opened, and it was only in January, when she failed to pay her rent, that a search for Rebecca was started. When her apartment was searched, a fresh pot of coffee with 2 cups was found in the kitchen, and it was noted that the bath had been filled with water. All of her belongings had been removed by Rebecca's brother after he was told that they'd be thrown into the street due to non-payment, destroying any evidence that may have been present. Rebecca was never found, and Jamie was raised by her grandmother. Anyone who has any information on this case is asked to contact the Baton Rouge Police Department at 225-389-2000. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.